So, alas, let me go and introduce myself. My name is Ryan Kelly, and I regret to inform you that today is the day I will be passing the gavel on to our new president. So I'm so excited to be here, but also it's a sad day for me. So as I reflect on 2025, I just want to say how grateful I am to have been your president. It challenged me in many ways as a human, as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a local business owner, and somebody that cares deeply about our community. So I grew a lot and learned a lot while I served you guys in this association, and I just wanted to, with some gratitude, say thank you. You know, I believe that right before you die, you have this highlight reel that flashes before your eyes. And some of my moments over the past year, I think, will be in them, including our 50th anniversary, which was just a great party. So having said that, I'm excited to move quickly into my senioritis and step off the stage. And I would like to just say a couple of quick things. I want to give a special shout out to Don Mills every month coming out here and doing our filming. Thank you, sir. You are a scholar and gentleman. Our sustaining members who pony up the extra money to make sure that this association thrives. Thank you guys all for being part of our sustaining members. And to each of you that come every month that care deeply for our community, for our businesses, for our local elected officials. We're really nothing without each other. We're just a big family that cares about where we live. So let's all give each other a round of applause. And with that, I'm going over to Ty.
All right, good morning, Business Alliance Sonoma County. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, guys. I do want to say to Ryan, thank you so much for your work in this year. It's not always glamorous, but Ryan certainly makes it look so, and I appreciate the energy and the passion you bring to the stage, to the work that you do. Truly, I actually interviewed with Ryan when I got this job, and I'll tell you, from the moment I met him, I knew that he was somebody that when he put his hat in the ring to do something, he was going to do it all out. It was going to be full effort to the best of his capability, and you have done that here and more. So thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate you. So one more round of applause for Ryan. Each year, our leadership here does change. We have new presidents, and I've had the honor of working with some pretty incredible people, Janet, Paul, Kim, and now Ryan. And I know that our next lineup that we're going to propose today is of equal caliber. So with that, I am going to direct you to your tables. There is a little sheet there, and it's also on the screens that are going to be on soon. But we are going to be presenting the recommended slate of directors and officers for the upcoming term. So the nomination committee conducted a very thorough review. We had a great pool of candidates this year, and I want to thank everyone who put their name forward. Your willingness to lead, especially in this organization, it matters greatly, and we're really grateful for that. So we're going to do this in little chunks because there's different groupings here. The first group is recommended for 1-year director term extensions. These are people that are currently serving that will be serving an extra year. We have Lisa Wicki-Schaffner, Don Mills, Marlene Soyland, Dick Dowd, and Nick Menendez. Are recommended for a second 3-year term. We have Rob Sandville and Kevin Zucco. And we have a few recommended new directors for 3-year terms. We have Samantha Paul, Jim Wallen, Ryan Long, Danny Urdelli, Ernest Berghoff, Nick Fry, and Brian Ling. And our final one is the executive officer slate that we are recommending, with immediate past president being Ryan Kelly, new president Tawny Fisconi, vice president Kathy Goodacre, and secretary treasurer Kim O'Day. And we are going to take a vote on the full group here. So with that, I'm going to call for any questions regarding the slate. All right, hear none. Any nominations from the floor? All right, hear none, then I am going to ask for a motion. One from Janet, thank you. Second from Ryan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. All right, thank you so much. Motion carried. All right. Welcome, new officers. All right, and then a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to get through quickly. So all right, so the prepaid program is open till the end of this month. So if you want to lock in that $350 rate for the year, it's this month. So you can go online on the store, you can email me, and we will get you locked into that. That's the $35 a program instead of the $40 for members, $45 for non-members. And with that, you are automatically registered for the monthly event. And if you cannot attend, you can send a stub. So please consider doing that. It expires at the end of January. And then 2026, all of these meetings, or GMMs, are going to take place on the first Wednesday of the month. There's no off ones for holidays this year, just the way the calendar lined up. So make sure to mark your calendars for the first Wednesday of the month. That will be here starting today, and February 4th will be our next one. And then we're going to go into self-introductions, and then we're going to get these slides up and get to our program sponsor for the day. So as I walk to your table, just stand up, give us your name and your business name, and then pass the mic. So we will start over here.
Good morning, David Brown, Adobe Associates.
Jason Tormino, PG&E Government Affairs.
Harry Davidian, Digital Sensing and Control.
Janet Connors, Summit State Bank.
Katie Dillwood, Christofferson Builders.
Carrie Chambers, Exchange Bank.
Hello, Ryan Lee, WSI Smart Marketing. I have two guests with me today. I've got David McDonald from UBEO. Thank you for being here. And we have Johan Scrimshire from Baymore Insurance Services.
Good morning, Paul Yeomans, Exchange Bank.
Jeff Quackbush, North Bay Business Journal.
Good morning, Ernest Burkhoff, broker and CEO of Burkhoff Realty.
Bill Bolster, Electro-Optical Components, and I have a guest today, Wally Tang, Sales Manager of Electro-Optical Components.
Gary Lentz, Loan Depot, Home Mortgage.
Neil Mockman, Women's Recovery Services. I'm a guest of Samantha Paul, CSO.
Madeline Keegan O'Connell, YWCA, Sonoma County.
Andrea Rodriguez, Sonoma Water.
Good morning, Lori Rooney, North Bay Biz Magazine.
Good morning, Haley Bly, Boys and Girls Club of Sonoma Marin.
Good morning, Paul Schwartz, Corcoran Icon Properties, Commercial Real Estate.
Good morning, Andriana Dupree, Career Technical Education Foundation of Sonoma County.
Good morning, Judy Groverman Walker, JGW Events and Travel.
Good morning, Sherry Granzato, Exitos Latino, Crush, and Bob The Drive.
Happy New Year, Melissa Galliani, Wine Country Radio and Digital.
Hi, Erin.
Good morning, Samantha Paul, Planning and Consulting, and I'm thrilled to have 5 guests with us this morning. November Women's Recovery Services, Neil Martin and Jenica Leonard from their board, as well as staff members Karen Shapiro-Stone and Executive Director Diane Madrigal, who we'll hear from in a little bit. And of course, last but not least, Heather Nelson, founder and lead strategist for the Connection Hive.
Jamie Aguilera, Sonoma Clean Power.
Eli Weinstein, CTE Foundation, Sonoma County.
Artie Dexter, LeDuc Dexter, Super Service Plumbing.
Good morning, Tony Tosconi, Tosconi Event and Management Solutions.
Good morning, Seth Mays, GMH Builders.
Good morning, Ramsey Brown with Exchange Bank.
Kurt Nichols, retired past president.
Howard Dalton, trying to retire. I have a guest this morning I want to introduce. This is Willie McDevitt, former principal in McDevitt a while ago and retired now. Retired former chairman of Bank of Marin and the happiest unemployed person you've ever met in your life.
Good morning, Nick Dexter, LeDuc Dexter Plumbing and Super Service Plumbing.
Good morning, Greg Hurd with BKF Engineers.
Good morning, Dick Dowd, retired past president.
Good morning, Jack Kern with Navigate Inc. And my guest this morning is Carrick Pierce. Brought his great manufacturing company to Sonoma County last year in Santa Rosa. So go manufacturer.
Chuck Root, Double Eagle Financial, where cash is still king.
Hi, Arthur Cheney, President of Wonder Blackness, Sonoma County, board member of First T North Coast, and member of Sonoma State University Police and Campus, as a President's Council on Police and Campus Safety.
Roy Martinez, Exit Strategies Group.
Diane Madrigal, Women's Recovery Services.
Karen Stowe, Women's Recovery Services.
Hello, Mark Stapp, Sonoma State University and Santa Rosa City Council, and I'm pleased to introduce a guest today, Ms. Lori Ann Farrell, our new interim city manager in Santa Rosa, fresh from Costa Mesa.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Looking forward to working with everybody.
Good morning, Sonoma County Sheriff Eddie Ingram. Happy New Year, Gerard Giudice, Council Member 3rd District, the business-friendly city of Roanoke Park.
Wow. Tom Sweat, I'm TZS Consulting and candidate for 4th District Supervisor.
Christopher Miller, Montgomery Village.
John Cregan, Santa Rosa Chief of Police.
Scott Kincaid, Facility Development Company and Skate Pack Chairman.
Good morning, Kristen Byrne, Peru Industrial Park and Noble Group.
Good morning, Sabino Rodas from Industrial Park, Peru Industrial Park. Sorry.
Mark Nelson, Midstate Construction.
Carly Gofferts, Midstate Construction.
Corey McCormick, Holly Construction.
Justin Hunter, Holly Construction.
Don Mills, Cuvert Brewing Company.
Jason Lee, Roseland School District.
Rick Carlisle, KF Engineers.
Marlene Soyland, Soyland Management Company.
Tracy Russo, Hogan Land Services, and I have a guest, Jessica Dominguez from Exchange Bank, Branch Manager.
Tony Spisman, 707 Promotions.
Kathy Goodacre, Consultant, Advisor, and Coach, and I have a guest this morning. I'm pleased to introduce Ryan Griffith. Most recently with a company he co-founded and sold, Hemp Fusion, and now looking for next opportunity in operations, customer relations, and sales.
Kevin C., All Terrain Accounting Solutions.
Sally Stroke, Leap Solutions.
Lori Rodriguez, Dealwood Burkle and Millar CPAs and Business Advisors.
Sean Jean, Relgi Race Consulting Engineers.
Ryan Long, Connected Outreach and City of Cotati Planning Commission.
Meg Rhodes, Santa Rosa Junior College.
Rob Sandville, KLH Consulting IT Services.
Good morning, Ryan Bucksbaum, Next One Staffing.
Andre Moran, Relgi Race Consulting Engineers and board member United Way of the Wine Country.
Good morning, Jen Boltermood with eXp Realty.
Good morning, Kevin Jones, Fast Times of Santa Rosa and member of United Way of the Wine Country Board. I have a guest this morning. It's Carrie Gabalman from Silhouette Security Group.
Kevin Zuko, ZFA Structural Engineers.
Joe Gaffney, St. Vincent de Paul.
Bella Martinez, Common Ground Society.
Jenny Douglas, Common Ground Society.
Kyle Betancourt, CFA Structural Engineers.
Kurt Hoffman, Abra Marketing.
Carmen Sinadani, Spalding, McCullough, and Tansel.
Jenica Leonard, Women's Recovery Services, guest of Samantha Paul.
Juliana Graham, BPM CPA firm, and also board member of Career Technical Education Foundation.
Brian Lane, real estate broker and appraiser.
Fernandez, Fidelity National Title.
Jim Rowland, Pep Housing. I have a guest today, Michael Taylor with Golden Thread Real Estate.
Siobhan Griffin with Columbia Bank, formerly Umpqua Bank.
Doug Marshall, GMH Builders.
Pat Burns, Sonoma County Farm Bureau.
John Media, Sonoma County Farm Bureau.
Nick Fry, Palmetto Vineyards.
Ken LaFranchi, Architecture and Development.
Paul Donaldson, Argonaut Constructors, past president, and happy birthday, Greg Hurd.
Andrea D'Angelo, Argonaut Constructors.
Kim O'Day, Fidelity National Title.
Jonathan So, Sotheby's International Realty.
Nick Caston, business strategist with Financial Prodigy and the San Jose City School Board. I have a guest today, Superintendent Lisa August with San Jose City Schools.
Chuck McPherson, Leap Solutions.
Diva Proto, Sonoma County Clerk, Recorder, Assessor.
Jeff Price, Keysight Technologies.
David Hagley, Summit State Bank, and Councilmember City of Healdsburg.
Carl Service, TLCD Architecture.
Lisa Whitkey Schaffner, North Coast Builders Exchange.
Marcella Piedra with the City of Rohnert Park.
Leslie Simmons with the Career Technical Education Foundation.
Good morning, Tim Schramm with Adobe Associates.
Ryan Stiles, England Volkers Real Estate and Yachting. And the Alliance is pleased to have as our guest my big sister, Christy Stiles, with Organized Wine Country, your home organizing, move-out management, and estate clean-out services.
Jeff Rowland, owner of Beat Out Glass.
Danny Sheehan, board member and Friends of Smart.
Christina Hollingsworth, Dua Burko and Millar, and also board chair of Community Foundation, Sonoma County.
Mike Pickens, district representative for the Operating Engineers, Local 3.
Steve Clegg, Bauer Associates, and president of Sonoma County Fire District.
Aaron Smith with Adobe Associates.
And if you are a guest today, please be sure to put your business card. We have some beer on top of the mantle that we'll be giving out. So if you have a business card to hold up, please do so now and I will come collect them. Or maybe pass them to the outside because it's a tight squeeze, guys, tight squeeze. Cool today, this is going to be a competitive draw. I know. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Holy Toledo, this is a competitive draw, guys. I'm going to shuffle and let our speaker choose the winners here. No peeking.
We got Wally Tang. Johan Scrimshire.
All right, guys, there's beer up here. Guys, the beer is donated by our very own board member, Don Mills, so thank you, Don. All right. So we're in an interesting place where we're waiting for our tech support to come, which is a great way to kick off the year. But I do want to say on your tables here, if you are in a row that's not the front row, you have a QR code. That QR code gives you the presentation as a PDF, so you could take it home and view it, or as Dr. Eiler's going through, you could zoom in and see the slides with him. And if you're in the front here and you need access as well, on our website under the membership video, general membership videos, you'll see the slide deck there as well. All of our slides are uploaded. Okay, and then we do have a program sponsor this morning, but we don't have slides. Okay, then, perfect. So we are going to welcome up our program sponsors, generously donated by Samantha Paul, WRS. So please give them a hand.
Don't hurt yourself here.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Diane Madrigal. I'm the Executive Director for Women's Recovery Services. I'm going to talk fast because we only have 3 minutes and we don't have our slides on the... So I'm going to pull the memory trick, see how much I remember of everything, but of course it's our passion that we do with WRS, so that shouldn't be too hard. Women's Recovery Services has been around for over 50 years. We celebrated 50-year gala last year, and it was a wonderful event, and we were able to just talk with everybody about how many women we have served in our community. The women that come to our program are sometimes pregnant, parenting, or single women that live in our community that maybe you may know, or maybe you don't, but you've seen and you've helped. So we are very grateful for your contributions and donations. Of 1/3 of our budget is based on what we collect from our community to help provide services for the women. And typically these services are free of charge to them, so it doesn't create an additional burden for them to try to find treatment. We're a 90-day program. We have 4 different programs that are part of our structure, which includes a children's program. And my mind's drawn blank. Children's program, and then the regular program is a 90-day program up to 120 days that women will stay with us. And then we have a transitional program, housing transitional, because that's one of our biggest issues for women, finding housing after they've completed treatment. Sometimes they do go home if that bridge has been repaired, but sometimes they also need a safe place to land where people aren't drinking or using. We serve we're very diverse in the population that we serve. But we also have, oh look at that, they're right there, woo, Saved by the Bell. And I have 30 seconds left, okay. So over the last 8 years, we've served over 400 women, probably about, not including the children. They say that for every person that's struggling with alcohol and drugs, that it impacts 7 other people. The truth about that is more like 30. And depending on the incidents and what happens in the community, these are folks that we want them to return healthy and able to participate in our community and be welcomed back with open arms after they've completed treatment and able to stabilize their homes and their families. This is a multi-generational impact, and we're proud to be able to provide that service. So if you don't know us, haven't seen us, please come get to know us. On your table there is a little handout about what we provide. Also, we have a website, www.Women's Recovery Services, and we're looking forward to another gala coming up in March. There's also a little QR code out there that you can scan, which is little handy dandy iPhones, and you'll find out more information. We've been blessed to the opportunity to help women recover, and that in turn helps the multiple generation impact of the children that are involved for the future. So for us, to you, and all of us being here part of it, we all share in that responsibility in one way, shape, form, or another. So we're grateful to the businesses in our community that also support us. And that's all I'm gonna say, because I think I'm up. Someone's waving at me? No, not yet? Okay, good.
Of course, as soon, I'm going to put this slide up while I introduce our speaker. Wow, look at, here we go. Thank you so much. Our regular AV person is out today, so the club has been working hard to fill the gap in the technology, the new tech, so thank you so much. That was a lot of pressure. I'm glad we got it up. All right, so I'm going to leave this up as I introduce our speaker. So Dr. Robert Eiler is a professor of economics and senior advisor for government and community relations at Sonoma State University, where he's been teaching since 1995. He holds a PhD in economics from University of California, Davis, and a BA in economics from CSU Chico. Dr. Eiler's research spans macroeconomics, monetary economics, and industry analysis, including work on the wine economy and economic policy. In addition to his academic work, he serves on the board of directors for Redwood Credit Union. And he is a native to Sonoma County with deep local roots. Dr. Eiler brings both global perspective and community insights to his teaching and leadership. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eiler.
Good morning, folks. Thanks for coming this morning. So, my job today, I'm going to walk us through what's going on in the macro economy and try to provide some perspectives on the local economy with that context from the macro level. It's going to be a really wild year. So, sort of three major themes that are coming up. One is that we have midterm elections in November, and some of that's going to shape on what we see in terms of fiscal policy between now and November and even beyond that. The second is we've got a lot of consternation around monetary policy, which I'll talk about in just a bit. And then more regionally here, we have two kind of related vectors, if you want to see it that way, but maybe they're not as related as maybe I think they are. Is we're having a lot of concern in the wine industry, and I'm going to try to talk about that when I talk about local labor markets and try to think about where we may be going there, and then what's going on in housing markets. And housing markets are kind of finding sort of a post-pandemic plateau in some ways, even with rates going down. I'll try to explain that in context when we talk about the housing forecast as well. So, got a lot to cover, we haven't got a lot of time, so let me get right into it. This is meant to be a depiction of the American labor market since January 2019. So if you seasonally adjust the number of people that are working in the United States since January 2019, you get this evolution, and then this is where we were in January 2020. So one of the things I've been asked a lot is how close we are to another recession, and unless that blue area above the black dotted line, which I'll explain briefly in just a second, starts to curl toward the black dotted line, we won't have a second recession declared in the United States. So much of how we declare recession is run around sort of directly or indirectly with labor markets. And right now our labor markets are still providing at least additional monthly gains as a trend average. There's a lot of concern about that, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But as a sort of a summary of where we are in labor markets, we still seem to see some warmth in those labor markets at the national level, but they're not as warm as they were. Now, with that in mind, one of the reasons why we haven't seen as much growth is because how much more growth can we expect? We had a really sharp cut going into the pandemic, and you can see that sort of cut there in the beginning of the graph moving left to right. But since we've recovered and now have expanded, we're getting to the point where we should expect to see some frictions in labor markets based on that growth, higher wages, fewer people in the labor market in terms of looking for work, with respect to the number of people who are actually out there that are qualified for the jobs that are open. And we're seeing this weird juxtaposition between lower job openings, more people coming into the labor market, but that you're not seeing as much hiring as you'd expect because people that are coming into the labor market may not be qualified enough for the remaining job openings. And so a lot of economists tend to watch those two in tandem as a way of forecasting where this blue area is going from here. And some of that's because we should not expect much more at this point. One of the reasons is that, as I just explained in another level, is how much more productive is the next worker you're hiring. So one of the reasons why we haven't seen as much income growth in the United States over the last, let's say, 5 or 6 quarters is because when people are getting hired, they're getting hired for relatively low-wage jobs that are filling in services jobs rather than on the, let's say, higher wage end. And when that happens, GDP tends to grow more slowly even if you're having jobs growth. So that productivity issue is another thing that's creeping in. And the other thing that's creeping up is our unemployment rate. So we've seen job openings fall. We've seen the number of people entering the labor force rise marginally. But when you slow down hiring and more people are coming, even if it's a small trickle of people, the unemployment rate wants to creep up. And we've seen some of that. It's not an alarming creep, but it's something that economists are starting to watch specifically in policy circles, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So the good news from this graph is while it doesn't show exponential growth, as long as we keep growing, we will avoid at least the tag of recession. Now, alongside the labor market, we think about inflation. So these data are what we call core personal consumption expenditures prices, and hopefully you can see this. The main idea here is the blue solid line. The blue solid line depicts the percentage change in the cost of what we buy at home from 12 months ago since January 2007 seasonally adjusted. So you can see for a long period of time, before that, which you can't unfortunately see very well. There's a second shaded area where you see the real takeoff. It happened about 12 months before that. There was a very long period in which we had slow, steady, very predictable inflation, and then inflation took off on us. Now, was that inflation unprecedented? The answer is no. Was it a long spell of inflation? The answer is no, if you think about it historically. However, if you have that long period of time in which you've had slow, steady, kind of below 2% inflation, and everybody's used to slowly creeping up prices, when you have any kind of a surge and it has a sustained amount of time, you're going to think, wow, this is a really unprecedented event. If you think about economic history in the United States, this spell of inflation is not that large, but it's lingering. And the idea is, why is it lingering around? And what I'm going to show you now is the circled area is kind of where we think we might be bottoming out in a medium-term way. So one of the biggest concerns in policy circles is while the inflation bout we saw post-pandemic was a quick surge, was not historically high when it peaked, but at least kind of shocked us economically, are we at a point where we won't get back down below that blue dotted line, which is the Federal Reserve sort of thinking where we want to weave expectations and how policy should want to push us toward that blue dotted line in the long term? If we can't get back down there, what should policy do? And is it a structural reason why we've kind of bottomed out? And that circled area is meant to kind of show, well, we're kind of at the bottom in this cycle. This shaded area, which you can see where those red dots are, is the current Federal Reserve forecast. So when they're thinking about monetary policy, they're watching those red dots and saying, where do we think inflation is going to go, and how should that inform our policy decision making? So for right now, we look like we actually might be cruising on that path, and I'll show you another perspective on this when I talk about interest rate forecasts in just a second. But for right now, that circled area kind of suggests that we've got some structural reasons why we may not go down any further. So the things we want to consider, and we're going to look at this in a little deeper sense in just a second. How much are tariffs and this sort of policy shift we've seen in 2025 affecting the movement of inflation? Okay? And I should have said one more thing real quick. When you see core in front of an inflation measure, that means you've pulled food and energy, products and services out of the basket of goods and the cost of that basket that you're measuring. So this is really meant to be the core spending by American households. And one of the issues with that is we've seen gas prices actually fall. So if you think of gas prices as a bellwether of what happens in energy markets, we've actually seen that descend a little bit. How much that permeates supply chains ends up sort of reckoning itself on this graph here. And policy is usually made on core measures, not on, let's say, total measures of what you hear in the news as a first pass. But we want to think about how tariffs might be another structural reason why we would not see a continued descent of inflation, and then that leads to a policy conundrum of what we do. Because if we lower rates with the idea that our labor markets have slowed down and we want to speed up hiring, that can create more inflation pressure depending on the situation. So that balancing act is something the Federal Reserve's got a lot of theoretical and sort of academic pressure around. And then if you've watched the news and financial side, there's also a lot of administrative pressure about what should happen with rates and how much of that will continue to bubble to the surface toward the midterm elections. And all that's sort of weaving itself together in a lot of different ways, especially how Americans reckon with that at the kitchen table at night. Now, this is kind of a funny graph in the sense it is a long view of tariff policy in the United States. So you might be able to see this in the back. It's the first date on the left-hand side is 1899. Okay, this is an annualized inflation, or sorry, an annualized tariff stance of the United States, trade weighted against the world. So in the McKinley era, okay, we'll go back there briefly, we were just about 30% against the world as a trade weighted tariff stance. And think about that as trade protection. We used to generate a lot of our federal income from tariffs way back, really way back in the day, okay? But then when we passed an income tax legislation in the early 1900s, and we shifted the way that our economy worked, we saw that tariffs, were changing the way we did international trade for the worse. And you can see this long period of time after the Second World War. If you're looking left to right, you'll see the descent toward the First World War, the pop-up of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, the descent toward the Second World War, and then this long period of free trade, sort of, you could say, is a renaissance around international trade, which has now been changed since April 2, 2025 on the far right-hand side. So we've kind of revisited McKinley-era style tariffs in 2025 in terms of their magnitude against the world. And the question is now we've kind of flattened out around 17% on average against the world. What's that mean for the American consumer? So the two things is not to be fooled when you hear about this in the news is one, American consumers will pay those tariffs either directly or indirectly at some point. We've seen some suppression of the initial effects of that because inventories were already on hand. And if you watch what happened in international trade in the first quarter of 2025 as a preliminary toward what most folks were thinking was going to happen in the second quarter of 2025, we saw inventory build up and an enormous number of imports come in. That's one of the reasons why we saw negative GDP growth in the first quarter, is because imports surged sort of out of season because you were building up inventories at the old pricing. Now those inventories are depleting, and as supply chains start to receive tariffed goods, they're going to start to push those price increases on through the supply chain. How much of it can be absorbed before the final consumer is sort of the big macro puzzle trying to be solved in policy circles as we speak. But at this elevation level, as you can see, most of that zaniness on the far right-hand side is all after April 2. Well, it's all after April 2. And it's really just a matter of how long and what magnitude when we're going to see the effect. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, with that said, you add up all that together, this is kind of a fun graph in the sense it's a little bit more qualitative than quantitative. Every quarter, the Federal Reserve does a straw poll and asks, where do you, as our Federal Open Market Committee members, the folks that make decisions about interest rates in the United States, see interest rates that we set going toward the next couple of years? So that first station of dots is 2025, and these are from December. So they knew what their policy stance was going to be when they said this because they just had set rates. But the thing that's funny about this as a subtlety is notice that even though they knew what the stance was at the end of 2025, there were some people who thought it should have not changed, which now put that black dot on there. The black dot is where we are. So they notice that the majority of the folks who took the straw poll around the Federal Open Market Committee thought they should be where we landed. But there was about 5 people who said, no, we should have stayed where we were. We shouldn't have done that second quarter point cut, which is where that top set of dots are. And then there was one relatively hawkish person, which if you're watching the financial news or you know the composition of the Federal Open Market Committee, recent change-wise, you probably know who that person is. It's the same person who's the lower dot in 2026, who wants to see rates descend much more quickly. Okay, under the supposition that that will boost jobs growth, everybody will be fine, and the inflation effects won't be that big of a deal. That's one political economic opinion running around DC right now. Okay, the next 2 years are 2026 and 2027. So the real upshot of that is the black dot is where we are today. If you look forward toward 2027, the third set of dots, it looks like it's going to slowly descend. And that's currently the policy stance of the Federal Reserve, is that we're going to see rate cuts in 2026 and 2027, probably somewhere between 75 and 100 basis points, or about 1% by the end of 2027 from where we are today. That final set of dots is what we call the longer run. It's sort of this ethereal, hand-wavy space that we don't really know how much farther in the distance, or much farther in the distance that is, but it suggests where we want to be sort of over time on average. Okay? So what that means is, one, we saw the 3 rate cuts, but where do we go from here? Right now, most financial markets think we're going to see about a 1% reduction between now and the end of 2027. We will see how that plays. The next is that there are some relief aspects. So if you do have loans that have variable rates, so credit cards, home equity lines of credit that are usually based on prime as a base rate, the prime rate and the federal funds rate, or at least the target rate range, move in unison with each other. So when there's a rate cut at the Fed, prime rates fall in unison, which then provides relief if the basis of your credit is prime rate plus some premium. So that's providing some relief, and should, at least in theory, reduce the pressure on loan delinquencies that we've seen slowly rise up, especially since 2023. Okay, that's good news for the economy, and that's the reason why you can take kind of more of a hawkish stance with respect to rates. But we will see how that exacerbates the inflation pressure, which is kind of the big question of the hour. Now, briefly, if we look at the long haul on interest rates, one of the biggest pieces of weirdness, which is now starting to fuel a lot of economic research in macro circles, is the far right-hand side of this graph. That blue line depicts the difference between the 10-year Treasury yield and the 3-month Treasury yield. Historically, the most prescient so-called spread about where a recession is coming once that spread goes below 0. So when it goes below 0, the supposition is that short-term money generates larger yield than long-term money, which is usually a problem for lenders in terms of the next dollar out the door. And it usually, within a 12-month period after that dips below 0, a recession begins. The reason, you have a credit crunch. I have no economic incentive to push more money out the door if I can't profit from the next dollar I push out the door. Hence, I slow down how much credit I'm providing and the economy starts to slow down. That's a very fast way of thinking about how that works. But notice, which I'm going to show you in a second, on the far right-hand side, we have a very long period of time And it's a historic period of time in which we stayed below zero. We had what is kind of known as a yield curve inversion. We still have some yield curve inversion aspects. It hasn't completely cleaned up, but with respect to the spread, it has a little bit. Now, if you look at the Federal Reserve stance, this is what it looks like in the long haul in terms of the Federal Reserve rate that it sets. So you can almost see the business cycle in reverse by those rates, and you can also see the two experiments with what's known as the zero lower bound since the large recession, or what we think of as the global financial crisis related recession, the fourth of those gray areas moving left to right. Okay, so that's where we are now. We've seen those rate cuts from the top. When we increased rates to fight inflation, we've now seen a descent in those rates. But that period when we were below zero has not created recession yet. And it's really baffled economists why we haven't seen more of a complete credit crunch. I'll come back and talk about that briefly when we talk about housing forecasts in just a bit. Now, in terms of rate forecasts, these data are quarterly. Fannie Mae, a government-sponsored organization that purchases conforming mortgages from the lending industry, puts a great rate forecast out every quarter, and they're basically looking at it where they're looking 2 years in the distance, so very similar to the dot graph we saw before. This is where they see the federal funds rate. So that shaded area is, well, you can't see that shaded area very well. So if you can kind of see the shaded area basically after the fourth quarter of 2025 on the far right-hand side to the fourth quarter of 2027, that's the forecast. So very similar, sort of descending toward 3% more or less, and really kind of holding there toward the end of 2027. That's what the Federal Reserve may do. Now, this is the 10-year Treasury rate. So the 10-year Treasury has been sort of somewhat sticky over the last, let's say, 12 or 18 months, but now it looks like it might lift a little bit. It's probably lifting because of general macro risk, and you're seeing more concern over our budget deficits creating more bond supply, which is going to pick up yield, and because they're going to see lower prices with that increase in supply. So we're expecting the 10-year to creep up a little bit, but what's been funny is that usually the 30-year mortgage rate is feeding right off of that 10-year Treasury, and the 30-year mortgage rate looks like it's going to continue to sink a little bit, but not quickly. So even if you see Federal Reserve rate cuts, don't think that that immediately means mortgage rate relief. It usually feeds off the longer-term rates. But in sum, do we expect rates to be relatively stable or descending? The answer is absolutely. Do we expect it to be quick? The answer is no, because we still have that underlying inflation pressure that bond investors are going to want to have some yield relief on in terms of what they really get to keep from their investment. So that's the game in town of how inflation, where we're going with the macroeconomy, and how we see the stance of the Federal Reserve playing out in a rate forecast looking forward. Now, what that means in sum is the following, at least as one sort of composite forecast. Every quarter, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve interviews 40 forecasters around the United States and asks them, where do you see the American economy over the next, let's say, 3 years? So in November, which should show up now, yep, November 2025, let me back up. They did their quarterly forecast with the idea that they're asking about what you knew at the end of quarter 3 2025, what do you see going forward toward the end of 2028, and then for inflation it just goes through 2027, sort of like what we saw in those forecast windows previously. That shaded column is the latest forecast from this 40 forecaster pool about the growth of real GDP, or you think of it as income after inflation and its percentage change. By the end of this year, they actually became a little bit more optimistic. The column just to the left of that shaded column is the previous quarter's forecast. So for 2025, they picked up the forecast. For 2026, they picked up the forecast, and basically the same for 27 and 28. Okay, no recession in sight yet. Okay, the unemployment rate is one of the main drivers of that. These forecasters do not see a major surge in the number of people unemployed. There's a lot of consternation around this. The supposition is that if rates continue to descend, that will support marginally more people being hired and kind of suppress what otherwise would be growth of the unemployment rate. But we have to think about how those two work together. If you have very low unemployment and people are still being hired sort of in trend, but you're getting very slow growth of the economy, it's because the folks we're hiring are not making a whole lot of money. Okay, we're not getting those sort of pop marginal gains that you see when you see really good, strong growth in the American economy. We're basically back to a pre-pandemic economy. Good in the sense we're not recessing, bad in the sense we're not growing at a faster pace. And part of that's because we still have this lingering level of inflation. If you think about inflation-adjusted income, if inflation is relatively high and you're not growing fast enough, that's going to suppress some of that income growth, and what you can think of as the purchasing power you're making from the income you earn. Okay? So what in sum that means is that we don't see a recession guaranteed in 2026 as forecasters. We kind of see there's a probability somewhere probably between 10 and 15% now. But the game in town is how the labor markets play out. If we start to see larger layoffs, if we start to see more pressure on prices that leads to a slowdown in hiring generally across the American economy, we will creep closer to recession. It's not so much the labeling of recession, it's how big and deep it's going to be. So if we can avoid any major geopolitical issue that really sinks the global movement in terms of the economy, we probably will avoid a recession that's relatively deep if we have one, or we may be able to just kind of skirt by like we did for most of the 2010s. Okay? So that is not terrible news, as much as it might give you a stomachache in certain parts of that. Now, California and our area are a little bit different. So what I'm going to show you over the next few slides are some reflections of local labor markets. One is in California statewide. So as of September 2025, and one thing I would just allude to real quick, the government shutdown in the fall of 2025 completely changed the way that data were being released. So we're about 2 months behind right now on labor. I usually would be showing you the November numbers right now. I'm still showing you September for California, and I'm going to show you August, unfortunately, for our local area, because that's where we're at in the data for right now. But the blue line here are the number of Californians, meaning people who live in California, who are either looking for work for themselves, or work for somebody else, what we call the labor force. Okay? So you can see from 2010 on a monthly basis, from January 2010 on a monthly basis, moving left to right. You can see the slow ascension coming out of the global financial crisis, the peak, the wobbliness coming out of the pandemic, and then the slow return of Californians looking for work, working, or work for themselves or somebody else. The chunk of that works for themselves or somebody else is that orange line. So you can see the real hammering that jobs took in the pandemic, and then the comeback. But notice the comeback has still not come back to the pre-pandemic level in terms of volume of people who live in California and have a job. And then the folks that are working for a California-based employer is the black line. So notice that's kind of the same thing. We were cruising close, and in 2022, we kind of stopped growing. And we've been relatively flat ever since. So you think, well, why isn't AI fueling all kinds of jobs? To a certain extent, it's because AI is not built to fuel all kind of jobs, but that's another ballgame. Could have done the whole thing today on that. But we have kind of stagnated in California, and we're kind of an outlier in terms of a lot of the states in the United States in terms of having this sort of brakes put on in 2022, but part of that was because rates went up. And we also just saw a general reduction in investment in California outside of AI, or what you can think of as intellectual technologies, or intellectual property technologies. Okay, but that circled area is really kind of the conundrum for California right now. We haven't seen much jobs growth. And in fact, there was about a 24-month period in which we had 0 jobs growth in California, which is unprecedented in the recorded history of California's economy outside of recession. So one thing to think about in California that is different than the national economy, we are probably feeling what you could think of as a mild stagflation episode, where prices are rising, but labor markets are fading a little bit faster at the same time, which are kind of is like the worst case scenario of a macroeconomy. The national economy is not quite there yet. It has the price pressure, but not necessarily the unemployment moving up at the pace you'd call it stagflation. California is kind of at the precipice of that. Now you look at the same data for our sort of regional economy. I'm going to repeat the California numbers here, but I'm going to break it up because I want to make a point on this. When you hear about the unemployment rate in Sonoma County, that is a statement of the people who live in Sonoma County, not the people who work in Sonoma County. So I'm going to break this into 2 pieces. The first piece is the residential labor force and those that are employed. So since 2024, this is the growth of people that are looking for work, working for somebody else, or working for themselves in these areas who live there. So that means there's more people looking around for work or working, which is great. The chunk of that people are working to work for themselves is the orange column. So if the blue column is taller than the orange column, that means unemployment is rising. Okay? And if you've watched the unemployment data regionally, we've seen that creep up across the board in the North Bay, and then a little bit in California, which you can see is repeated there. Since 2019, that's the labor force. Now notice the big contrast. I took it before the pandemic. Look at Sonoma and Marin counties. Right? Lower labor force numbers than we had from before the pandemic, which means we have fewer people looking for work, working for themselves, or working for somebody else, generally 6 years on. Okay? Mendocino County, flat as a pancake. Lake, Napa, and California is seeing growth. The orange column, same deal. Look on the far right-hand side. Sonoma and Marin, below where we were pre-pandemic, 6 years on. Okay? We have really stagnated in these two counties. Why? Two reasons, generally speaking. One, we saw an exodus of workers during the pandemic that was replaced by an influx of people who had maybe no intention to work. Okay? And we need to think about that. I'll come back and talk about that right at the end. And the second is we've seen our housing prices creep up, which we know has some indirect effect. How large an effect is in millions of pages have been written in policy circles. Okay, now this is the number of people who work for a locally based employer in that growth. So we've seen growth, but it's somewhat anemic in Sonoma and Marin over the last year. Napa and Mendocino have seen a little bit larger pop. Lake County's actually descending a little bit. Lake County's kind of going through a weird post-pandemic reformatting of where people thought that Lake County was going to be this place where you'd actually see more growth, like this, small little rural place that was connected to larger places, and that kind of faded.
Still have to get there.
This is since August 2019. Same story in Sonoma and Marin County, which I now have those arrows pointed to kind of move your vision there. 6 years on. Okay? So that's an issue with workforce development, economic development, policy stance, housing prices, commercial real estate availability, blended. If we look at where we might be going from a jobs market standpoint, this is where we're going. Now look at Napa. Napa has been, in both the last two recessions, really the star of the coming out party, and that's because it has become a worldwide destination for adults who don't intend to gamble. Okay? So if you're on the margin between Vegas, when Vegas is really booming, and Napa, there's a kind of a split there where more affluent, somewhat inelastic spenders are still coming to Napa, specifically from the core Bay Area, and without an equity market shock, as much as Napa might lament the idea that occupancy rates are down a little bit and what they're earning is down a little bit in terms of hotel night stays, total spending is down a little bit, it's still elevated from where it was from the pandemic. So looking at this sort of station by station annual piece is not as good as thinking in the long term. And Napa still has a lot of growth potential depending on what plays out from an economic development standpoint. But so much of this depends on Napa being that place that remains a global sort of trademark, if you will, and really the top of wallet choice for travelers worldwide. If you look at the growth industries, where it shows growth across the board, where it's maybe 5.5% growth from where we are today in Sonoma County, it's sort of using what's happened over the last year as a springboard. For San Francisco, healthcare, tech, and security services are looking at seeing sort of where we're headed. Those are the big three. For all other areas, really the North Bay, healthcare looks like it's going to stand out, and more specifically, services for what you can think of as more senior residents. Okay? And then warehousing and delivery services. But what I don't see here is medical technology, life sciences, wine. So one of the things about this forecast is that the wine industry is not seen as something that's going to burgeon or sort of reimagine itself in such a way that by 2030 it's at this brand new place. We're going to see a structural struggle inside the wine industry probably for the next few years. But in a very similar way we think about Napa and travel, we have to also think about the wine industry had a really nice boost coming out of the pandemic in terms of what you think of as direct-to-consumer sales, but suffered through other supply chains. Now they're feeling the direct-to-consumer sales contract, and they had not figured themselves some other way, and now you're seeing some sort of what I would consider to be somewhat wild decision-making strategically about vineyards, winery size. You're going to see more mergers and acquisitions. You're going to see a contraction of that industry. And one of the biggest question marks, which I've been asked a couple of times about this, and I'm going to do a presentation on it in like a month, is what does that mean in terms of local economies? And if you think about Sonoma and Napa as sort of examples of California wine industries and areas that are dedicated to wine, one of the things to split in your mind is the sort of agriculture and manufacturing aspect of the wine industry versus the tourism and consumer aspect of the wine industry. If people are still traveling here and still want to consume wine, there will be a core of continued revenue generation to come from that might act as a small buttress against the negativity on the agriculture and manufacturing side. And the two don't necessarily feed off of each other. If Napa contracted by 20% in terms of the number of wineries, that won't necessarily keep people from coming to Napa seeking a wine outcome. The trickiness is how that 20% contraction looks from a visual standpoint to the person who wants to drop $5,000 in a weekend in Napa. Is it something that's like, whoa, I don't want to be here because it looks like a ghost town? That's where it really starts to change. But Napa already knows that, and they're already making sure that the evolution of the wine industry and its visualization and sort of the Napa Valley brand, and Sonoma County and sort of Russian River Valley, Dry Creek Valley, and our major valleys, Sonoma Valley too, along Highway 12, we've got to be thinking about that visual as the wine industry changes over time. The last thing somebody wants to come to wine country and see somebody out there with a tractor rolling up rootstock into a big ball to be burned. Okay? And if y'all been driving around, you probably know what I'm talking about, because you've seen a little bit of this in people that have said, I'm done here, I'm going to pull all my rootstock out and put it in a ball, and then when I have a burn day, I'm going to go ahead and light it up. Okay? You're going to see some of that. The hope that happens on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and not on Friday night. Okay? Anyway, but construction and manufacturing are also looking right now in the forecast not to burgeon very much. That construction piece I'm going to talk about in more depth in just a second. Solano County is getting a little bit more interesting. If you've been following the California Forever saga, I would follow it more closely. So Google California Forever and kind of bookmark it for at least the next 12 or 18 months. You might find some real interesting stuff starting to happen. There's a lot of money getting built up to create a new municipality in Solano County, or one that is related to a current municipality and on an annexed piece of property would already have all the structural aspects of a municipality that is incorporated in place. They would just extend that. Okay. Either way, you might hear about a very large investment, whether it's around shipbuilding, advanced manufacturing, or something in between is a big question mark, but that's going to be very intriguing to see when that plays out. Some of that Solano County growth, which is second to the right, or second to the end to next Sacramento on the far right-hand side, is coming with that idea. Okay, so to wrap up, the housing forecast is relatively flat. So if you look at housing prices over the last, let's say, 18 months, we've seen some flattening. To a certain extent, we should have expected that. And the other thing is this, just like I've talked about before, people get very stuck on the latest station of time, forgetting that the 4 years previous to that, housing prices burgeoned. Okay? Santa Barbara County, for example, has seen 61% increase in median home price over the last 6 years. Okay? San Diego County is like 58. Orange County is 59. Kern County is 63. Kern County. You know what I'm talking about? So you got to think, okay, what's that mean? But check it out. On the left-hand side, look at the places that are there. Santa Barbara over the next year is supposed to do another 2.7 on top of 60. Okay? Imperial County's gone up maybe about 45%, another 2.5. Madera, San Bernardino, Riverside, Kings County, all these places really felt like, let's say, the post-pandemic surge coming out of the Los Angeles area for people who could work remotely, wanted to go from an apartment to a house, and were done with the traffic. Those areas basically between San Bernardino going up to, let's say, like Madera, really saw good growth where Fresno, in some cases, got kind of skipped over. Okay? But San Bernardino, Ontario, Riverside County in general, and then thinking about San Bernardino as related to that, have seen an amazing transformation of housing markets and housing wealth. Okay? Now you look at the far right-hand side, unfortunately, we've got some very familiar names here. Mendocino, Trinity, Humboldt Lake, Marin, Napa, Solano, and Sonoma are all kind of bringing up the bottom of the housing forecast. So we've really seen a slip here. Mendocino County right now, at least the median home price, basically has zero gain remaining from the pandemic. San Francisco County, alongside of that, has also zero gain median home price in the city. Okay? Because the pandemic hit certain places negatively to the profit of other places. San Francisco and Mendocino County happen to be, unfortunately, alongside with Trinity County, the standouts in that negativity. But generally speaking, this is kind of a flat forecast. So I told you earlier I would talk about this real quick again. We have a lot of people who are locked into very low mortgages in terms of rates. Without a major labor market shift, we will not see an enormous number of new or existing units go on market and push the supply up and really force prices down. What we're seeing right now is more buyer fatigue, forcing some flatness to happen. Not a lot of building happening. The developers are very nervous to go into a market that might be sagging, alongside of the rise in the cost of development. So when you add those two together, the new units have started to slow down. The existing units don't have a large amount of reason to pop up, but you are seeing them creep up marginally. So people taking profits off the table. And now we've had 5 years on that if you've got 25%, 30% growth in your home value, and you were 55 and now you're 60, you might be thinking this is the end of the ballgame. I'm going to take that cash off the table and I'm moving to Idaho. So, and we know where people have sort of split. And Montana's funny because a lot of people I know moved to Montana, got that one winter grip on them, and then suddenly like scrambled to get back here. Right? So it's been kind of funny to watch how housing markets have played off of each other too. But what this forecast suggests is that there will be general negativity in California housing markets, specifically here in the North Bay, but not surging negativity. Some of that is somewhat buttressed by the idea we're going to see rates descend slightly. Okay, what might give you a little bit more pause is this forecast out of the California Department of Finance. So if you think about the number of kids that are in K through 12, and this is public school only, this is the latest forecast through 2034-35 academic year out of the Department of Finance based on their population data and the way that they model the way kids go to school. This is Marin County in terms of if we take the 24-25 academic year as the index number equal to 100 and where that red dotted line begins, that's Marin, Sonoma, Napa. I'm going to stop there because notice how they're all kind of working in unison with each other. We are in a regional labor population, sort of the way people decide to live in a certain place market. This is Solano County. So the only reason Solano County is not basically ascending at the same pace as here is because the expectation is there will be a new municipality that will show up and there will be an increase in the number of working families in Solano County. But that's the stretch bet in these data, so always have those caveats in your mind. And that's California. That's the current forecast, okay? And so I've seen this forecast move all over the place the last 3 or 4 years because the pandemic really left in its wake a lot of uncertainty about the way people are going to live in California. And we've seen some repatriation of people from the original post-pandemic exodus. But we're watching closely to see how these numbers go. These numbers do tell a tale about the way that school districts are going to have to make decisions, for better or for worse, but also really tell a tale of opportunities in the sense that if this is where we're headed, can we not do economic and workforce development that will actually reinvigorate this place in such a way to move that trend back up? And the answer is yes. The trick is that this is a long-term play. You're not going to reverse this trend quickly. And housing policy, unfortunately, does not have a quick, easy answer to reversing this either. If I have wealth and I'm 65 and I've been thinking about wine country for the last 25 years and a housing unit goes up, if I buy it, I'm going in. And I don't intend to replicate at 65 years old, right? So what's that mean in terms of the population change if what we attract here are wealthy pickleball players and not working families, okay? So, and I don't, you can see I'm trying to keep it flat, right? Okay. So, let's wrap up once and for all. If we think about the macro and local things looking forward, think about it from a leadership standpoint. AI is going to be some part of our lives one way or the other as far as the eye can see. The trickiness of it is, will macro policy, or more specifically political policy, affect the way we utilize AI and how far the investments can go? This is one of the biggest fears in our equity markets right now, that while policy right now looks very, very accommodating to AI's growth, if that changes for some reason and a lot of the bets that we've made in the equity markets with respect to artificial intelligence fade, that's going to lead to a large sort of ripple effect through our macroeconomy. Okay, but for right now, we look like we're going to continue to see slow but steady growth, and the trickery of it is, can we get to the friction point where we have AI as a sort of a complement to labor without replacing labor in such a way that it removes markets for consumer goods? That's the friction point that artificial intelligence is walking toward in terms of where the detriment really gets weird in terms of a policy standpoint. Labor is going to go, it's sort of related to that. We're going to see a lot of labor issues. If you work for the state of California, there's a large amount of friction between our labor unions and our administration. That is a microcosm of what's happening with labor more generally. Watch for more of that. AI and policy around AI feed into that. What's going to happen with the wine industry? Again, keep in your mind that dichotomy. Some places, to a certain extent Sonoma County, to a larger extent Napa County, have split themselves in terms of what happens at the winery and the vineyard vis-a-vis what happens with visitors. But at some point they can tip. Okay, so we have to address that in some way, shape, or form. The main way to do it is to try to think about ways in which we partner, in my mind, we partner and provide complementary ways to provide more revenue at the door of the winery, not some other place. We need to get visitors converted into buying wine when they're there, and really understanding that if you're between the ages of 18 and 25 years old, and you're thinking zero or low alcohol, which just, I can't even think about drinking a wine that has zero or low alcohol, it drives me nuts. But that's a sidebar. My daughter's cohort looks like that they're a little bit more tricky about the way that they consume wine. We have to think again about the health aspects and where we're going to do that. That seems to be the quickest portal to sort of rearranging the way the consumer side of it's going to change. Sorry. Whether science can come here and stay. That's another workforce and economic development aspect. Sonoma State University, for example, is trying to push along that line of becoming a place where more scientists come out. And then the healthcare side is another place we're pushing. How will healthcare evolve, especially in a place that is more senior by the nature of the population trend? So those are the things that I think about. As just a quick sidebar, I didn't have to pay any royalties for these pictures because I created them all myself on ChatGPT. So with that, if we have time for questions, Ty, I'm more than happy to take some.
You have time for questions.
Thank you.
Hi, you didn't discuss the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration, yet I understand a lot of people have left the country. And what California would expect to have a disproportionate amount of that. What impact is that having? What do you expect going forward in that regard?
That's a great question. I'm sorry I didn't address that when we talked about labor force. I should have taken a 30-second right turn and talked more deeply about that. There's no doubt that it has changed two things right away, directly, and then an indirect effect we've probably seen in California. Directly, we've seen taxable sales go down. So our merchants have seen a lower amount of demand as a result of those changes and sort of the way people are thinking about either what they consume, where they live, and thus how they consume, getting ready to do some other thing with their life. And the second is really the labor choice and how much we are connected to an undocumented workforce and just getting things done. I mean, that's kind of the dirty little secret that we've had, is that we really do rely on that, and thus we need to support that population. And now that that population's in flux, what does that mean for our local economy? And we've kind of, sort of figured that nothing was going to change there, and the economic incentives to stick around was going to be there. Now there's a political incentive maybe not to be there. What's that mean? And then that indirectly means that we're going to see some changes in the number of businesses that we have here that relied on that. That's a structural change in the way you do business, and if that cost change to you means you can't stay in business, we're going to see some contraction which could accelerate other job losses. That's where they start to really see their effects. So California, you could say, is feeling some of that effects in some of the data I showed you, and that's why I should have taken that right turn. How California is standing out a little bit in terms of its labor market problems is likely related to what we've seen, especially in the last 12 months with respect to immigration. Howard.
Two questions, if I could, quickly, Bob. One is related to tariffs, trade, etc., and I'll use the soybean situation in Montana, where they'd established 10-year relationships with buyers from all over the world. The tariffs comes in, the buyers go somewhere else permanently at this point, and we turn around and take tariff money and say, well, we're gonna just give this to the farmers, and that scares me when you start subsidizing business. That's number one. And number two is, can you talk about the labor shortage related to the ag industry in California? We've got a couple members from the Farm Bureau here, and our immigration policy, or is there any window where that can be addressed in a cohesive manner?
So thank you, Howard. So on the soybean side, which I think is more on the general agricultural commodity side, the supposition is that if you provide some rearrangement of tariff revenue to subsidize those industries, they'll be able to lower prices and re-attract those partners. That's the theory. The practice is, if you don't know what's going to happen with policy and you find another partner for which the price difference isn't that big of a deal, and you don't have to deal with the additional headache, you're going to stick around there. And those other countries, and this is the thing I think the Trump administration did not foresee happening, because they felt like we were in somewhat of a monopolistic position, is that they would find permanent new trading partners. Not sort of gap filler, but actually, we're done now. So one of the things is, if you do that rearrangement, the good thing from a farmer standpoint is it should provide you with some relief on the revenue you lost, but won't necessarily re-attract the customers in the medium and long term. That's the game in town in terms of that happening. We need to support our farmers. I come from a farm family, and we're real lucky right now in terms of we have more of a lean toward beef, and beef has been going bananas. No pun intended with the mix of commodities there. But the beef prices have helped sort of keep away some weird decision making that would have probably had to happen in our family otherwise. For folks that aren't in beef or in say, a rising price commodity, it probably will get weirder before it gets better. From a labor standpoint, the labor market, again, is very similar to what we see in sort of visitor services in terms of how the amount of undocumented workers we use. Just sourcing those workers and sourcing them at the price that makes sense from an economic standpoint is the big deal in terms of how immigration plays into agricultural decision making. But we also have a political issue with the way we use water in California also. So if you go north of us, there's a large amount of concern that the water availability, not that the water's not there, but my ability to use it as a farmer is not as clean as it used to be. What's that mean for farmers with all these other vectors coming in? And then what does that mean from a broader economic policy in California if we become more dependent on outside agriculture because we didn't take care of our own? Now I'm coming from a very biased farmer standpoint, but the bottom line is that we have, the labor thing is just one part of many vectors that are unfortunately negatively affecting sort of farmers writ large in California right now. We've got to just rearrange the policy stance of how we support our farmers, of course.
Howdy. Looking for silver linings there. I'm watching a lot of that and thinking from a Sonoma County perspective, it's not looking that great in the short run, but are there things you see cyclically that might attract businesses and growth here? For instance, I look at, as somebody, a lot of us in here own real estate, seeing real estate prices flat or going down, it's like, well, that's not good. Could that attract people here where they're looking at places to relocate their business? It's beautiful here, and there's lots of things to recommend it. What do you see as kind of the things that could bring us out of this?
Yeah, I think the three things that I think about that are immediate positive aspects. One is that we are seeing at least some growth of housing in certain places. Rohnert Park's a real standout in this, which has been great to see that Rohnert Park's going to double down on going to become a central economic hub in Sonoma County south of Santa Rosa. So the more that municipalities can kind of think about how they merge housing and economic policy together and want to attract businesses, recognizing that we have housing for your workers here, or just thinking more regionally beyond that, we need to think about more regional partnerships. Those are the two things right away that help, but they don't solve the problem unless we are able to attract the businesses immediately and then bring in working families. If all it does is turn into a larger senior community, that doesn't solve the other problem, except for healthcare. So one of the things that we love is healthcare. We want, from a sort of foundational economic development standpoint, education and healthcare resources are huge pieces of that puzzle in terms of attracting and keeping larger employers historically. But the more you start to lean toward healthcare because your population is changing and the demand for additional healthcare is there, you might change the nature of how workers come in, fill in housing, and then ultimately lead to choice in terms of commercial space, housing, worker availability, and their proximity to work, and what that means for the composition of your industries regionally. So we're likely to continue to see healthcare grow, and that's a good thing from a lot of skilled job standpoint. How that then, if we don't do something alongside of that diversifies the economy, we will continue to move more slowly into a more broad senior community. Marin County is kind of a microcosm of that. The third thing, which I'm proud to say, we are going through a positive transition in Sonoma State. A lot of it is based on science and healthcare and putting out more people in terms of being trained for jobs. So the more that we can grow and get back to kind of where we were and put those people here in Sonoma County, and then the real kicker is keeping them here, becoming a sort of a brain gain place. That's really, to me, that's the home run we can hit. And that's why the things that are happening in Rohnert Park, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, all in merger can be a place where we can see more businesses come because they're attracted to the workers that Sonoma State's putting out. And that's alongside of the great things that the junior college and our K-12 system is doing as well. We've got to think about a more unified way of looking at workforce development.
All right.
How are we doing, folks? Is that it?
We are so fortunate to be able to get Dr. Eiler here every year in the first quarter. We're one of the first groups to get him on stage. So thank you so much for making the time for us in this group. We're really grateful. Talk about making complex stuff digestible. He's so good at that, so thank you. All right, so our next program is set for the 4th of February. If you are not a member and you enjoyed a presentation like this, we have them every month. So please join us, become a member. We would love to have you. We can't do this work, we can't bring forward this conversation without your participation. Join in 2026. And with that, I will wish you a great month and I'll see you in February.
You